You know what they said when the singer of Rollin' in the Deep kept getting up out of her seat?
What?
Citadel. Citadel. That's where we are. We're at the Cairo Citadel. It's sitting atop a hill overlooking now like the whole massive city of Cairo. Cairo, as we know it today, wasn't really founded until I believe 969. And so we can really start talking about Cairo, especially in the conquest of the Crusades, right? Which of course are going to start just 100 years or so after the founding of Cairo. And that's where this citadel comes into play because it's built by a crusading Muslim, Saladin. Hey, Emily, when we think about, really powerful conquerors being centered in Egypt, we could really say that it's just a whole Caesar Saladin. And throw in some Napoleonic ice cream. That's what I used to think Neapolitan ice cream was.
You had to explain that one to me. Yeah, so Saladin rose in prominence and importance as a military leader during the whole of the Crusades, which started in 1095 is when Pope Urban called for the first crusade, and then it ended in like the late 1300s was the last one. I know there were 4 major crusades, but there were a lot of kind of spin-offs. And Saladin, so kind of gained importance during the first couple of crusades and then emerged as essentially the leader of Syria and Egypt in the Middle Eastern world by the Third Crusade. And he was most known for creating a peace with Richard I, or Richard the Lionhearted of England. So they had both fought against each other for a while. They actually both really respected each other. We have primary source writings from both of them talking about how they each had a high regard for the other. And they came to a peace after a couple of decades of fighting that said the Muslim Arabs were going to control the Holy Land, but Christians, pilgrims, could come freely visit whenever they wanted to. And that peace lasted for all of 3 years until Saladin died.
Okay, so we're standing outside the Mosque of Muhammad Ali. This was built beginning in 1830 by Muhammad Ali to commemorate his rule. He's incredibly important. He's known as sort of the founder or the father of modern Egypt. So to get us from Saladin all the way through Muhammad Ali, we had a series of Arab Muslim rulers, right? So after the Arab Muslims, the successors of Muhammad, conquer Egypt, basically Egypt from that point on becomes a subservient sort of tributary state to whoever is the power of the Islamic world, or Dar al-Islam. So that becomes the Abbasid Caliphate that's centered in Baghdad. Eventually that's going to become Saladin's kingdom and empire that's called the Ayyubid dynasty. What's really interesting is that Saladin's Ayyubid dynasty, over time, they're going to employ a group of non-Arab soldiers known as Mamluks. So if you're familiar with the Ottoman Empire, this is very similar to their Janissary class. And over time, just like what happened with the Ottoman Empire, the Mamluks are going to rise up in power and control and eventually launch a coup and start their own sultanate known as the Mamluk Sultanate. There she is. Still up at the Citadel, there's another mosque here, the Mosque of the Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad ibn Qalawun. He is the longest serving Mamluk Sultan. So this was built, I believe it said during the, what did it say? 1330s. So much, much earlier than the Mosque of Muhammad Ali, 500 years earlier. So we had the coup by the Mamluks. They basically used their power as this now high-ranking, sometimes they were enslaved soldiers, sometimes they were technically free, but basically they were these unique soldier class of the Sultan. The idea was that then they would be loyal to the Sultan and not to the other elites in that Ayyubid dynasty. That comes back to bite the Sultan because eventually they gain enough power that they can overthrow and choose their own guy. So they found the Mamluk Sultanate. There was a 1250 coup. In 1260, they are one of the only armies, maybe the only army in the world that actually defeats the Mongols. So this is at the same moment that the Mongol Empire is stretching into the Middle East. They actually fight the Mongols in Syria and stop them. They're the reason that the Mongols don't ever get into Africa. And so from that point on, the Mamluk Sultanate controls Egypt and most of the Levant. They rule them for a few hundred years until eventually they are then overtaken by the Ottoman Empire. I want to make sure I get the dates right. So in 1517 is when the Ottomans conquered Cairo. So remember, the Ottomans rise kind of out of the ashes of the Mongol Empire, right? So the Mamluk Sultanate based here in Cairo really stops the Mongol advance, but then that's going to allow for some other empires to rise in what's modern day Turkey, especially the Ottomans. They then come back and conquer Egypt. Everyone wants this land, right? Every empire all the way back to Alexander the Great and the Romans. So in 1517, Cairo in Egypt becomes, again, a part of another bigger empire. This is something that's happening throughout its history under the Ottomans. It was captured by Sultan Selim I, who's the father of Suleiman the Magnificent, if you're familiar with Ottoman history. And the capture of the city was fairly quick. The Mamluk leadership knew that they could not defeat the massive Ottoman army. They tried to flee, but eventually Sultan Selim captured the Mamluk Sultan and had him executed. So the Ottoman Empire rules very successfully for a few hundred years, right? So during this kind of epic golden age of the Ottoman Empire, Egypt is just very much a part of that empire, and there's normally a very important governor, someone who's like a representative of the Ottoman Sultan who is sent to rule Egypt. Eventually, by the early 1800s, that is a guy by the name of Muhammad Ali. He's the guy, this mosque is for him. He's the one that's known as the father of Egypt. When I say Muhammad Ali, let's be honest, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Cassius Clay, the boxer.
Boxer.
Yes.
Right? Okay, that's what comes to most people's minds.
Yes.
Do you know why? There are a few different very famous people known as Muhammad Ali. For example, Cassius Clay, he changes his name to Muhammad Ali. Do you know why that's such a common name?
Because the Prophet Muhammad and the fourth rightly guided Caliph Ali.
Muhammad Ali is sent specifically to recapture and basically reinstate Ottoman control over Cairo after Napoleon came in and invaded. Did not shoot the nose off the Sphinx, by the way. That's a myth. It was already gone.
Napoleon, as he was trying to conquer all of Europe, also wanted to conquer Egypt because this region of the world, the Eastern Mediterranean, had been so prominent for all of history. And the couple of things that I know about his conquering of Egypt is that his troops were actually responsible for finding the Rosetta Stone. Do you know what the Rosetta Stone is, Emily?
Yes, it's the really important, it basically helped us figure out hieroglyphics, right?
Yes, because it has translations of two different Egypt dialects and Greek. Once they found the Greek, they were able to translate all of the different Egyptian hieroglyphic writings, which began the field and the study of Egyptology. So that is when Egyptian history became super well known and prominent. I think that's why people still really care about it today, because relatively speaking, it's a new field of study because it only happened in the 1800s because we had lost the translations for so long.
But basically after this French occupation, the Ottomans are like, we need to send a really strong, powerful guy, head of a military who can come in and reassert control. The problem is that they send a really strong, powerful guy, head of a military to reassert control, and he is going to then rise up and actually take power from the Ottomans. So Muhammad Ali was actually Albanian. He was part of the Albanian troops in the Ottoman military, and so he's kind of similar almost to like Cleopatra, is not indigenous Egyptian, but is going to come in and become the governor of Egypt, and then over time is going to use his 40 or so year rule from around 1805 to 1848 to slowly remove Ottoman control. By the end, they will just be like nominally paying some kind of tribute to the Ottomans. They will mostly be independent. Unfortunately, he's going to do that by aligning himself more closely with Western Europe, which is going to be very smart in a lot of ways, but it's also going to end up with him being sort of indebted to the Western imperial powers. Emily found a trebuchet. She's really excited. She literally goes, "Ooh, a trebuchet!" Muhammad Ali recognizes the need to modernize. He's one of those people that looks to the West and sees the value in industrialization, in a more professional bureaucracy and military. And so he does those things. We're going to see, even you can look at something like uniforms, right? And you can see that all the way through, at some point, we're going to start to change into more modern style uniforms. More by modern, I mean Western style uniforms. Muhammad Ali brings in a lot of European advisors. He brings in like people from the Scottish Navy to like teach him and his people about how to run an efficient navy. He brings in industrial managers to help run his factories. Again, this is really smart, but it's also going to be detrimental to the pure independence of Egypt, right? Because even though they're still technically under Ottoman control, and then when the Ottomans fall, they'll technically be independent, they're still going to really be under the foreign influence, especially of Britain and France. His modernization campaigns are clearly successful because he actually goes to war with the Ottoman Sultan, right? So he wants to fully declare Egyptian independence. He goes to at least 2 wars with the Ottomans, and he wins both of them to the point that he was positioned 2 different times to conquer Constantinople. And the only thing that stopped him from doing that was outside European influence, meaning European powers stepped in and negotiated to have Muhammad Ali not go in and topple Constantinople, because what the Western European powers wanted is they wanted stability in this region. So they knew that the Ottoman power was weakening. They're known as the sick man of Europe, but they didn't want a power change that vast. And so they were really, really incentivized to keep the Sultan and keep the Ottomans technically in control of Constantinople. So what they did is they gave a lot of concessions to Muhammad Ali. They said, we're going to send a lot of foreign investment into Egypt. We are also going to proclaim that you are the new hereditary ruler of Egypt and your heirs will rule as an Egyptian dynasty, and we, the European powers, will acknowledge that if you basically stay out of Constantinople. Okay, but genuinely, I didn't know that about Muhammad Ali in Egypt actually going to war with the Ottomans.
Right, neither did I.
Yeah, what's your take on that real quick? Like, what's your impression?
From a European perspective, they just realized that Egypt was going to become this dominant power. So rather than letting them become this dominant power, they tried to placate them and say, we'll give you whatever you want if you don't take down the Ottomans. Because I think at that point, the Europeans were dealing with so much of their own stuff in like the 1800s, mid 1800s, that they didn't want to have to deal with another aggressor state in the East. So it makes sense from like a European perspective, seeing the big picture. We need to make sure that we are limiting the power of this growing empire.
I mean, they have a relationship with the Ottoman Sultan, right?
Right.
So they want to keep him in power nominally.
Yes.
And they're also doing this, right? What we're starting to see is that the European strategy in the Middle East is to divide and placate, right? So it's like some groups are we have the rise of the Saud dynasty that's going to eventually become Saudi Arabia. So all these little chunks are starting to get kind of taken over as the Ottoman Empire collapses. And what Europeans are doing, they're just going through and saying, like, we recognize you, we recognize you, we recognize you.
We don't want a united front.
We don't want any of you united. And of course, that's going to lead to chaos in the 20th century. One last thing to note about Muhammad Ali's rule is that he was not a benevolent ruler, right? He wanted to become the full authoritarian leader of Egypt and hopefully expand it into an empire. So for one, he was a conqueror. He straight up conquered Sudan, and of course he fought those wars with the Ottoman for control. But he also did a lot to consolidate his own power against the traditional elites. Remember, he's Albanian coming in trying to rule. And so for one, there was still this Mamluk class of these elite soldiers. He purges that class. He's like, I don't want another coup like what happened to establish the Mamluk Sultanate. He also wants to take power and money from the elites by massively taxing. So basically he hikes up taxes insanely high, knowing that what that's going to mean is that the elite tax farmers, those are the people who are kind of given the privilege of accepting taxes on behalf of the state and then maybe keeping some of that wealth for themselves. He knows that the taxes are so high that they won't be able to actually pay the state what they need to. And so then he'll be able to justify taking the land for the state. So basically by the end of Muhammad Ali's rule, the Egyptian state controls most of the economy, and that's going to include the growing textile industry, Egyptian cotton, and also the growing military manufacturing industry as well. Muhammad Ali's heirs would rule for the next century, but with increasing British influence. During World War I, the British deposed an Egyptian sultan who had sided with the Ottoman Empire, and they installed their own, making Egypt a British protectorate until 1922. Even then, when the Kingdom of Egypt became technically independent, the British wielded a lot of informal power until the 1952 Egyptian Revolution, which established the Republic of Egypt in 1953.
Is it still filming?
Oh.
Emily, I have a trivia question for you then.
Okay, great.
You taught at an Islamic school.
Yes.
And you've taught world history for a long time.
Yes.
What were the names of the rightly guided caliphs in order?
I don't know. I know Muhammad, and then I know there was Abu Bakr.
Yes.
Abu Bakr was the first, and I know Ali was the last.
Yes.
And I don't know the two in between.
Umar and Uthman.
Umar and Uthman, that now sounds familiar, and my students would give me D.
So, Emily, would we call that a turret? Oh, Emily, I don't actually know what a turret is. Oh, is it too chunky to be a turret? Like, does a turret need to be skinny and dainty?
I thought a turret was like a flying buttress.
Nope.
I guess I don't know enough about castles.
We'll check back in a second.
Oh,
we're looking at the picture, okay?
yeah. This is not a turret.
Okay, definitely not.
Turrets are very tiny and are used to only house guns.
Dainty.
Very dainty.
Okay, this is...
I would say a sphinx's the size of this. I was trying to make sure it wasn't working.
I'm trying to think of a turret pun, but I can't. We just learned that.
Turret means little tower.
Little tower. And yeah, they normally house a gun that they can like rotate, or so them being round is so that they can like rotate around and shoot a lot of different directions. So, not a turret. Great rounded structure.